Hello, Hack Night attendees. Welcome everyone to our latest edition of Chai Hack Night Remote. This is Chai Hack Night number 423. We're very glad you could join us. My name is Claire and I will be your host this evening along with my co-host.
My name is Miyako Furuhashi. I'll be a co-host tonight.
So just to give a quick rundown of the agenda, live stream has started. Very quickly now, we're going to go to welcome and announcements. At 7:10, the presentation officially begins. Q&A, 7:35. 8 o'clock p.m. is the separate Zoom call for breakout groups. So that's a separate Zoom link. It's not going to be on this call or on this YouTube stream. So separate link, we'll show it. Or breakout groups at 8:20. That's what you get to civically hack and discuss things with your fellow attendees and socialize. So that's on the Zoom call. Look forward to it. Okay.
And let's get to the announcement section. We not only meet this over the Zoom every Tuesdays, we also chat through Slack. You can join slackmeet.chaihacknight.org. We have various channels. Please join, peek around, start picking up conversation with other Chai Hack Night members.
Okay. Upcoming presentations. 12/8, Marshini Chetty teaching young children about online privacy and security. I think I just answered a ticket from Marshini because I work at University of Chicago. 12:15 is Northside Housing and Supportive Services. 12:22 and 12:29, holiday break, no events. And then 1/5/2021, we're back for more civic hacking fun in a whole new year.
I'm a Chai Hack Night member. Chai Hack Night is a member organization. Please join to become a member. As a member, you can do various things, actually participate how the organization should run. You can become a board of directors. You can vote for changes in policies and bylaws and make decisions on what Chai Hack Night does. Please go to chaihacknight.org, membership apply. I highly encourage to do this ASAP, which I need to apply. I'll do that tonight as well.
I also need to do that. Chai Hack Night, Tech and Data Help Desk. So I need to make this bigger because I can't see it, but it's a Tech and Data Help Desk. It's people offering pro bono technology and data assistance to people and organizations in Chicagoland who need it. So you can request help at that link, bit.ly Chai Hack Night Help Desk. Please read it instead of just listening because I didn't say it all. Sign up to volunteer. It's another, so you can give help, get help. Sounds like a winning proposal.
So after the presentation, we have post-presentation Zoom call for introductions, announcements, breakout group pitches. Call will start shortly after the presentation, which is 8 p.m. Please join. Here's the link for the Zoom call. And also I wanted to give a friendly reminder, our code of conduct will strictly enforced even on remote, and we ask for your respect and consideration in posting appropriate questions.
Well, with that, I think that's the end of announcements, and it's time for our presentation. So I just want to, let me see, welcome. So it's the circuit decoding the Cook County court system. And we have several presenters. Can you show the slide? Do you mind the first presentation slide? The cover slide. Oh, okay. Okay. So, yeah, I think we will. So we have, yeah, several presenters. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble viewing the names, but several people from the Better Government Association and other collaborators. I think we will get started then.
All right. If you want me to start, my name is John Chase. I'm with the Better Government Association, and I'm here with several of our colleagues from both Injustice Watch and from DataMade. And we're here to talk about the circuit, which is decoding the Cook County court system is the project that we worked on. So just a very quick overview of what this project is. We took, DataMade sort of led this effort with Injustice Watch. BGA soon joined thereafter in an effort to really sort of get into the data of the Cook County court system, which is a notoriously opaque court government body. And so it served a lot of our interests. So we've got the collaborators here, BGA, Injustice Watch, DataMade. We were also joined by a Chicago reporter. There's no representatives from the reporter here tonight, but they were intimately involved in the work throughout much of the project. And the University of Chicago Harris Public Policy helped with a lot of analysis. And so, as I was saying, the background for our project is the circuit court, looking at this, the circuit court of Cook County, which is the largest judicial court in Illinois and one of the largest unified court systems in the nation. Serves the Cook County's 5.2 million residents in Chicago and the suburbs, and more than 1 million cases are filed each year. But as I was saying, it is notoriously secret and opaque. In Illinois, courts are exempt from FOIA requests. While the public has access to terminals, cases are only able to be examined individually, and Cook County courts remain very reliant on paper, not computerized records. And the only other way to get court data is to request it through the chief judge's office to get this sort of massive amount of data. So an idea was sparked well more than a year ago, probably about 2 years ago, to get to the heart of what this data is. And so that's what we'll be talking about in a little bit. I'm a journalist with the BGA. I had investigations for the BGA. And to us, this was a major project that we were really interested in looking into to get to transparency. That's one of the cornerstones of our organization. So it sort of started with conversations developing out of the Chicago Data Collaborative, whose members share a goal of obtaining Cook County court data. Injustice Watch applied for VPN access, and then partnered with DataMade to scrape the criminal court data, and later other divisions in civil court. And at the same time, this was all happening, journalism organizations like ours, BGA, Injustice Watch, and the Chicago Reporter, started having conversations about forming a journalism collaborative to really analyze and report out on this data. What is it showing? What sort of trends could we maybe see? How can we sort of report on things that have never been reported on? In addition to gathering all this data, what can the data begin to tell us? And so the journalism organizations also thought together, by working together with DataMade and with analysis from University of Chicago, we could pool our resources and work collaboratively to analyze and report on these large data sets. We're talking about millions of records. If there's 1 million cases filed across the entire system every year, we're talking about hundreds of thousands just in the criminal division. And that's obviously a tremendous amount of data. And so the two primary goals for the project were to improve transparency and accountability within the circuit court system of Cook County and build a replicable model for large-scale collaborative journalism. Again, this is a bit of a test case for all of us to really sort of look into what was happening and whether this is what works with this, what doesn't work, what lessons can we learn at a time when journalism is doing a lot more collaborations where organizations are working together. So the project structure that we came up with was each organization was going to include an editor or editors, reporters, administrative staff to work collaboratively on the project. Amanda Miley, who's with Injustice Watch, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. She was instrumental in working on basically fundraising for the project and trying to get support for it, and really sort of getting a lot of the news organizations and the other organizations to work together. We would meet in person until the pandemic hit, 2 to 3 times per week. We'd also communicate via Slack after the pandemic hit. We would have meetings a lot like this via Zoom, and also continue on Slack and regular phone calls and emails and whatnot. And the group worked to raise funds to provide additional support to the team that project partners do not have in-house. This is was not inexpensive work. It took everybody that you will meet tonight, countless hours of labor and work, plus some of the people you won't meet tonight who also worked for many tens of hundreds of hours to try to scrape this data, organize it. And again, I'll leave this to Bia and others to talk about, but to take this massive amount of data and try to make sense of it, so that journalists like myself and Jared and Casey and those from Injustice, and Emily from Injustice Watch and BGA and Chicago Reporter could analyze this and start producing stories on it, which we did in late October. We produced 2 stories as long as the data visuals, which we'll talk about. So with that, I will hand it off to Bia.
Thanks, John. Yeah, my name is Bia Mosky. Until recently, I was a developer at DataMade. I now work at the New York Times on their COVID project, but I'm glad that I was able to contribute to this project before I left. So yeah, as John alluded to, until recently, if you wanted to get information about a court case, you were a journalist, for example, you would physically go to Cook County Courthouse, and there was a booth and you could go and look up an individual case, but there was no bird's eye view of the trends in the entire system. It would really be looking case by case. So in the summer of 2018, let's back up for a second here. I'm going to talk about scraping and data very briefly, and then about the visualizations that we made for this first release. So yeah, in summer of 2018, Injustice Watch was granted remote access to the mainframe system, and Forrest Gregg, who's one of the partners at DataMade, wrote a scraper, and we ran it between April and August of 2019, nights and weekends, using a VPN with an aim to not overwhelm the system and also not draw an enormous amount of attention to this scraping effort. And in that process, we scraped at least 8.5 million cases, so kind of an enormous amount of data. And what I have as a screenshot here is a extremely cleaned version of that data. So when it came in, it was very messy, and there was a lot of data work went into this. So you can see this chapter section and description are nice regular values here, but it was many months of cleaning to get them to that point. Clerks would kind of enter this free text entry field, and this was largely led up by Forrest and Gene Cochran at DataMade using a tool called Dedupe, using some custom Python scripts to try to massage this data into something that was usable, something where when you read that description field, us as a human will understand that 2 slightly different strings are both saying possession of a fraudulent ID card, for example, but there are a lot of small variations there that we needed to work on. So the way that we access this data set is we have a remote database set up using Amazon RDS, which means that various tech-savvy journalists and various developers working on this project were able to access it. And then we use a series of fairly complicated make files to make changes to analysis schema as we needed to. So it was really important during this project to have a reproducible data pipeline, meaning that the data that was scraped, like we're never modifying it, never changing anything, but there are many steps of building up the analysis tables that we need to do for the reporting and for the data visualizations. Kind of as we were working on the design, as we were working on the data cleaning, there were probably hundreds of times that we needed to kind of tear down all of the analysis that we did and build it back up, and Makefiles let us do that. And those are all, so I'd say probably thousands of lines of SQL are run by those Makefiles to turn the data that we originally scraped, which was over 8 million records. In this image here, each line is a charge on a case. So a case has many charges, and getting it into a usable form for the visualization. Yeah, can I get a next slide, John? So the visualization is kind of where I came onto this project in full. Maybe stuck.
Yeah, got it.
Cool. So again, giant data set. There are kind of many entry points. So each case file, it not only includes like the charges incoming in a case, but also like every event in the court case as it proceeds. So there are kind of many different ways we could approach this data, and the decision for a first kind of overview data exploration tool was to look at incoming charges. So at this is a screenshot, it's charges.thecircuit.cc. And if you can go here, you can get a good sense of charges, like all charges in the system between 2000 and 2018, which is never something that we were had access to, like as journalists or citizens. And especially, so there was some availability of felony case trends, but misdemeanors here is the part that's really kind of incredibly new. And going through this, let's see, let's have a minute here. I guess what I wanted to say is that this is really a starting point. So if there's a detail page for each high-level offense category, so each offense category, we have about 30 of them, and that's the uniform criminal reporting categories that are maintained by the FBI. And so each one contains many different charges. So if you go into, for example, battery, there are a lot of different charges within that you can look at the trends. And there's also a contact form on each page. So we're really hoping this is a jumping off point for many different stories. And we tried to design this visualization for kind of a general audience, of someone who's trying to understand large scale trends, but also someone who's like, I'm specifically interested in this particular charge. We tried to put a lot of information in there. And we also spent a lot of time making this in both English and Spanish, which is something that I'm in particular proud of. Yeah, I think that covers it.
Who's next after Bia?
Casey, you're muted.
Yeah, Casey, I think you need it.
I got excited and I just started talking while I was on mute. But my name's Casey Toner. I'm a reporter with the Better Government Association. And we knew we wanted to write about SOJs from the very beginning. And an SOJ is a substitution of judge. That means, when you could basically, any defendant can basically ask for a new judge when the case goes in the courtroom. And we got a tip, and we learned from that tip that this judge, James Lynn, he was SOJ'd on so many sex cases that they stopped being assigned to him. And, when I learned of this, I was just like, what possibly could have happened that caused this? So we use this data set to kind of get at that. And so we wrote a query that isolated all sex cases, all crimes that were sex cases, and which judges they were assigned to. And that way we could pinpoint when the SOJs began and when the sex cases stopped being assigned to him. And, we got the data, then we transferred it to a spreadsheet. And then we began, calling former prosecutors who tried sex cases in his courtroom. And we found one by using I found one basically by just going through clips in the library, or Chicago Public Library, their online website, and just looking at cases where attorneys had just tried cases in his courtroom for sex cases, and I just sort of kind of cold calling people at random, eventually I found one. And could you go to the next slide, John? I eventually found one, and what I did was I looked up all the cases with Judge Lynn, and I found the first one, as you could see, that was SOJ'd, and it was SOJ'd in June 2011. So I thought to myself, it had to have happened before then. It had to have happened probably relatively, recently. So I talked to this attorney on the phone, and I just went through these cases. I went through the names of the defendant, and Joseph Foltz right there is the name of the defendant, and that's the one that hit. And what she basically said was that there's a case where the defendant was found guilty of sexual assault by a jury, and upon review, the judge reversed the jury's verdict, which is really rare. And it was at that point that the state just began using this motion to just bounce cases from his courtroom. Next slide, please. And you could see here, this is like a screenshot of the case itself. You could see how it says 1/13/2011, verdict of guilty, right? And then you could see motion for defendant for a new trial. That's the defense asking for a new trial. And you could see later that day, on April 13th, the defendant found guilty of a lesser included offense. And through reporting, we found that's a way a judge can kind of downgrade charges. Next slide, please. And so what I did was I pulled that, he appealed the case, so I pulled the appellate case, and it contained a full trial transcript. And this is useful because, we got kind of a line-by-line accounting of what happened, what the judge's thinking was on this. We had witness statements, from people that were, affected by the victim or by the defendant and so on. And I also requested emails from the state attorney's office about the case. And it was interesting because the state attorney's office held on to emails from 9 years ago. So in the emails, people were talking about the case. They're saying that, the judge is going too far. Someone has to do something. I mean, from the top level prosecutors, like Anita Alvarez was saying this. And so then I wrote another query that basically determined the case outcome for each case. And, depending on what it was, like if it said that there was a finding of guilty, I would classify that as a bench trial, right? And if it was a verdict of guilty, I would classify that as a jury trial. And, what we found basically is that leading up to this case, Lynn had twice as many bench trials for sex cases in a 13-year period, more than any other judge in Cook County. And so basically we found, when we proved in our story, was Lynn went from the most sex case bench trials to none at all. Emily, take it from here.
Yeah, so I think another one of the stories that we did, in addition to writing about Judge Lynn, was writing about another judge who is now a former judge, Diane Cannon. And I thought it was interesting to share this because I think there are, really two ways as journalists that we kind of use data. So one of the ways is like how Casey just described, where, we got a tip and then we looked and were able to use this massive data set to see if, the things that we were hearing and saying were actually happening, if there was, a trail for that in this massive data set. The other way to do it is, to kind of look at the data and let that lead the story. And so, one of the judges that we decided to focus on was Judge Cannon, because she had the most substitution of judge motions filed in her courtroom, basically out of any of the judges who are currently on the bench. She stood out for the last couple of years, had much higher, twice as many of these motions filed in her courtroom. People were avoiding practicing before her, basically. And so, that was one way that we got into writing about this particular judge. And so, as we kind of reported on the why, and tried to get information on, why practitioners didn't want to practice before this judge and what the issues were. We heard a lot of things. The attorneys and the defendants, see things on a different level than we do now when we're looking at this huge system-wide picture with data. But those people, they know what they know what they've experienced, at this individual level. And so talking with the sources and people who have real world experience, before this judge, kind of told us where we should look further into the data. So like one of the things that I had heard several times was about, you don't want to take a deal. You don't want to take probation in Judge Cannon's courtroom. She's super harsh. She'll send you to the Department of Corrections if you mess up. And so, after hearing that a couple of times, we were able to check it out in the data and see if it was indeed accurate. What people's impressions were on the ground, that she had been sending more people to the Department of Corrections on probation violations than other judges. And that did indeed turn out to be accurate. And so, and John, if you want to switch to the next slide. The other thing that I wanted to just bring up about, working with this data and writing the story is that even though we did so much work cleaning the data, there was so much work to be done in the fact checking. And we spent weeks and weeks going through and making sure each substitution of judge motion was actually a substitution of judge motion. You can do so much with this data, but this is a data set that was never intended to be used how we're using it. And so, you have these very complicated cases that are, like there was the one case that I've shown at the bottom here. This particular defendant had SOJ'd Judge Cannon like 5 different times over several years. And so, we really had to go through individually and check a lot of things. And it was a lot of work, I think, even, after doing all this work. So it's just, we've learned that it's a very messy data set that needs a lot of attention and of care, all the way through the process. And I think I'll switch over to Jared now, who will talk more about the messy data we've dealt with.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, this was really, truly a project with a lot of opportunity and a ton of challenges. It was more data, I think, that a lot of people in the project had worked on before. Like everybody had talked about, it was huge when you think of cases. It's even bigger when you think of docket events. So you have millions of cases, but if you think of every single thing that happens in a court, you're talking 30 million, hundreds of millions of different events all the way through. So it gets really big. We had 3 newsrooms, a tech company, a university. Everybody has different missions. There's 24 employees kind of bouncing around. So it gets tough to put everybody into a similar team. You've got kind of difficulty in collaborations. You like to assign everybody different roles in this, people concentrating on data, people concentrating on writing stories, reporting, people concentrating on engagement, getting the message out to the community. But one of the biggest obstacles I faced, and I think everybody faced and has been discussed, is the problems with the data. There's, I guess if I'm qualitatively discussing it, 3 different types of data I can think of, which are, there's clean data, there is messy data, and then there is absolutely putrid data. And this set in many ways was the 3rd option. You had kind of numbers all over the place. And Bea had talked a little bit about how they used dedupe to put a lot of the charges together so you can compare them. I used gazetteer mode essentially to link them to the FBI UCR categories for the state of Illinois. This is a national system that standardizes the charges across state borders. If you look at the charges, like the counts, they'll consist of a name, burglary, attempted burglary, whichever else, and an Illinois criminal statutes code. It'll look essentially like the number 720, then letters ILCS, and then numbers 12345.6a, essentially, or varying depending on each individual law. There's many ways for the clerks to enter the data. DataMade used the parser to cut the sections of the law and then group similar and identical charges together by specific crime and overlapping category so that we can compare these across charges or across cases. There were other obstacles in addition to the data work. You had personnel changes. Bia, who spoke earlier, left for the bright lights of the New York Times, but many other people also left during the process of reporting this, of course, of a more than year-long project, and you had to get people in and adjusted to it as it was going on. But the editors finally decided on a major data visualization and a couple of stories that the reporters spoke about earlier. I can flip over to the next slide, which ought to cover for us where we go from here. One of the pieces we want to clean up is race and ethnicity, trying to standardize that across all cases. The clerk's data system is built on COBOL, very old kind of process, relies on manual entry of records rather than drop-down menus, so just errors all over the place with people typing in these code numbers and charges. As a result, you have variables that change over time. You have nonsense entries like the race letter Z or races identified by numbers. We want to try to group them by census categories where possible and expand it with using existing data sets. Can only be improved using the best record in the system to add it. In other words, one that has one unique ID that'll link the best race data in the system. And I can break over to the next slide. The way that the court system links individuals in the system is the IR number, the individual record. It's generated by the Chicago Police Department for all agencies and is linked to a person's fingerprint. It's not even uniform within the clerk's system. But what we found in our analysis is that the race is recorded more frequently in the criminal division than the municipal division by the clerk. And we want to use to improve the race data, linking it back to the municipal data or forward to the criminal data to improve it, using central booking numbers in the system to link to other cases, race data, record numbers, IR data in previous or subsequent cases, and maybe using fuzzy or exact matches to other cases to as well as data from the sheriff to kind of improve these. I guess a way to describe this, it would be like if every time in the system you saw Jared Ritecki in the data with my birth date, you would treat it as the same person. You could also use a fuzzy match that would try and reconcile Charles, Charlie, Chuck, C-U-H-C-K, and Chuck, C-U-H-K Smith with the same birth date, January 4th, 1968, and the data could say this is the same or this is not the same person. This will allow us to improve race and ethnicity across the data reporting and kind of outcomes for people in the system with similar criminal backgrounds, which is kind of the nuts and bolts of comparing some of these things in the system and kind of how the criminal justice system disparately impacts communities of color. So I think that's the biggest idea for some of the things we want to clean up. I will pass the end of this off to John to explain where we go from here.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, where we go from here is it's obviously what we launched in October was just the start of our project. It took us an extraordinary amount of time to get there, but once we got there, we did feel it's the start, not the finish. We've got sort of a number of different things that we're planning on continuing on in 2021. We're going to have engagement opportunities with communities that have been most affected and have the most, one of the things this data shows us is the number of defendants in zip codes and which are the most zip codes, communities that are most affected by the court system and have the most intersections with the court system. Going to those communities and talking to community groups and residents in those communities about what sorts of stories and what sorts of things we should try to find in this data. That's one major thing we're going to be working on. We're also going to be collaborating with other news organizations, both big and small, small groups, the small organizations that maybe can't afford to spend a year and a half looking at data, but that are really interested in this sort of work, or larger news organizations in order to really spread the word on this work. And then also, what's also next is training. As you can tell, this data is immensely complicated, very difficult to learn. The data set that we all have sort of put together here as part of this project is immense and complicated, and training all the reporters, all the members of the different organizations that are involved in this project on how to use that data, how to analyze it, how to continue to clean it up so that it is usable, is sort of another major step. So those are three major things we're planning on for 2021. In addition to just writing stories that will come out of coming out of this data. So with that, I know we're a little over time, but I think we are done. I'm going to stop sharing our screen, and we're open for questions.
Thanks very much. That was a really interesting presentation. So now we have a couple questions, and I think more are coming in from our YouTube live stream. Okay. First question is, who are your target audiences for this data? Do you have like specific people in mind? You're thinking this will be really pertinent to them?
I'll start, but I will try not to manipulate the whole conversation. What I just said about trying to find communities that are affected most by the court system, the communities that have the most intersections with the court system, is immensely important to me personally, to as an audience that we want to engage with and find out not only wanting them to read our stories, but getting a real conversation going about what sorts of data we should be looking at, what sorts of ways we might be able to clean this data in a way that can prove certain things that we maybe all suspect about the court system, but don't actually know. Others, obviously, this is going to be very important to people in the legal community. I think that's, and policymakers, people that can do something not only about the data itself, which is a mess and should really be clean, and this should all be shouldn't take this amount of work to make this public like it is. It should be like that. But so not only addressing those issues, but the policies, fixing policies that we might be able to highlight in terms of patterns and problems that we're seeing in the court system. So.
And just to backpack on John, like we have a story, like without getting too far into it, like a drug story that I'm kind of interested in. And it's one of these things where we will let the data kind of tell us where to go. We'll put in a query and it will just kind of identify like what we should be looking for.
Thank you. Let me ask the next question. It looks like the criminal charges are consistently decreasing over time. Was that really the case? Were there any crimes that increased over the time?
It's an interesting question, because it's one of these things that's studied immensely in terms of criminology. Like, people have looked at this for so long, and they can't really agree on it. It's measured differently. You're kind of counting with stats all around the country, but crime rates have steadily been going down essentially since the 70s. I mean, there's a few spikes here and there, but you see it almost entirely kind of on a downward trend. If you look at it, I guess you're going to need a lot more kind of PhD level research to get to the base cause of why this is the case. But I think in general, you see a lot going down. There's a few obvious exceptions to the rule. There's a couple in the database where you have things that are like crimes that were created in the middle of the database. So you sort of see non-existent crime that then like springs out of nothingness, which when in reality, the crime itself didn't exist in the year 2000. So you'll see some of that. I don't know if anybody else can think of ones that have gone up. There are a few other limited exceptions, but mostly as a general trend, it did tend to go downward for the entirety of the period.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as Jared. Generally, the national trend is lower arrests, lower convictions, but so almost all of them, like the trend is down. Some of them are like something that comes to mind is civics. Prosecuting retail theft less means that there are fewer arrests for that coming in. There are also changes in cannabis charges, those dropping off very significantly, which you can like see in the 2 decades that we're looking at. But one that came to mind as not following that trend, there might be others, but the one that came to my mind was deadly weapons, where it's kind of an example of what Jared is saying, where we have a new charge that looks like in 2004, armed habitual criminal became a charge that started to be attached to cases. And so there were, 0 cases for that before 2004. And then there's, the invention of that crime. And suddenly we have, looks like it peaks around like 80 cases a month. Yeah, so deadly weapons is the one that came to mind, is staying somewhat steady, maybe even a little bit trending upward in felonies. But I think it's also really interesting kind of case studies and how like, crime is the arrests that are coming in, and those are in many ways like constructed and they change over time.
I would love to hear, which the audience member asked this question, about the process for deciding how to work together. How did you agree on the proposed structure? It sounds like a good template for further efforts.
I'll take a little bit of that. I think everyone's got an opinion about it. It was difficult. It was very difficult. How did we agree? We all knew the potential for this project, and I think that was ultimately what brought us all together. Looking at a really bold experiment here to try to wrangle this monster of data and make something out of it. So I think it wasn't insanely hard to get us all in a room together to start talking about this. This is sort of becoming the new normal in journalism. As we progress through, the cleaning of the data and finding out really how problematic it was and how much work it involved, and also our different organizations' priorities. We're very passionate about transparency. Injustice Watch is very passionate about, finding out problems in the criminal justice system, which is obviously core to this. And they were the first ones to do this. Chicago Reporter has a long history of looking at race and class issues. And so we had to really balance that out and really debate it out and really have discussions about it. We all were sort of on equal footing. And so it sometimes had us not moving as quickly as we all wanted to move in terms of making progress and getting the stories going and getting like real momentum on the project. So it was sort of thought of as a template for future collaborations. I would say I'd probably make some tweaks to it, maybe have a more centered, focused, somebody agreed, somebody was not with all 3 organizations who could maybe, be a mediator to work out some of the issues. There's other things too that I would propose, or at least want to have conversations about. But I really, for all the difficulties, I'm really proud of the work that was done and the work we're going to be doing.
And, on our reporting side, we kind of pooled our resources based on, the stories we were interested in, and the editors kind of selected the stories. We went from there. And Emily and I had both expressed an interest in the substitution of judge motions. So we were paired up, and I think we worked pretty well together. And we kind of divvied up 2 stories that we were working on, and we both kind of assisted with each other, with those stories in terms of interviews and data work and picking up records and all the other stuff. And really, once I felt that we kind of got on that reporting path, I think things started going very smoothly.
Thank you. The next question is from the also audience. Was there user testing that informed the content strategy? This person is wondering how it was decided what to show and how to explain specifically for Spanish speakers.
Yeah, Bia, I think you were. I thought that was sort of your world.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So there was a whole proposal for user testing, we thought about doing it, we planned to do it, and then we were hit by a pandemic, and the project went through a lot of changes and went through a bunch of personnel changes as well. People working on the visualization side who left the project. So we didn't end up doing user testing. I think it'd be great to do in the future. I think that's a really good question. Yeah, I think we were in a kind of race to get something that started to make this data useful, and opted for starting to publish it and get it out in the world. And hopefully do some user testing in the future. So right now the Spanish, it's exactly the same as the English content. I see the same person. You also asked about matching Spanish names in the database. That's something that what Jared was describing was.
Yeah, this was the one I think that was, what was it called? There's legal references that are issued by the state of Illinois, the state of California, and the state of Connecticut that break down charges into Spanish in a pretty detailed fashion. Like they're essentially copies of each other, but that was a very good reference with these sort of things because it had a lot of the crimes broken down that way into to Spanish, so that was helpful.
Hi. Kind of going on the Spanish thing. Let's see. Oh, okay. Okay. Are there, I think there's something about, did you consider nicknames in Spanish for in the database? Like people might have, they know their name, but then like their nickname in Spanish that might be substituted for the regular name.
I think what this is asking about, and Francisco, please correct me if this is wrong, but what Jared was describing about the kind of advanced matching for IR numbers for finding like records of the same person that are like slight variations of the same name, like Charlie or Chuck thing. The answer is that we have not done that yet, but looking at like common nicknames in other languages like Spanish would definitely be part of like a good strategy there of not just Charlie and Chuck, but also like a wider variety of nicknames for common names. But that works as far as I know. Correct me if that's wrong, Jared.
No, I think that's going to be part of it. It's with especially when you're doing fuzzy matching, it's always kind of a guessing process and a trouble when you're dealing with this many records. But I think that there's kind of a opportunity to think about this, and a lot of people at the University of Chicago have worked with some of this. So there's at least a couple of people who have some experience with it, and I'm not certain how they dealt with Spanish names / nicknames, but there's probably definitely going to be some hiccups when we're getting to that in the next steps.
Yeah, definitely the question of how do you know when a name is the same name is a hugely complex one. But common nicknames is part of it.
Thank you for your answers. Next question is from the audience. Are there specifics that you can point out regarding why this data was so hard to obtain?
Sorry, so hard to obtain.
Why was it? Yeah, why is it difficult to get them?
I'll let anybody else who wants to weigh in on this do so. It's historically Dorothy Brown has been the head of the clerk of the circuit court for 16 years now, and she's a disaster. I mean, just to put it frankly, she's in terms of her record keeping, and I mean she's come under federal consent decrees. There's been problems for years on this, in addition to the federal investigations that have gone on her watch. So there hasn't been a concerted effort by her and by others in the Cook County court system to really sort of focus and make this a priority. And it is a huge undertaking too. So it's long been very paper centric. It hasn't changed from when I was a rookie reporter in Chicago in the mid 1990s and having to go check lawsuits at the end of the night that were filed that day. Not much has changed. And so because of that, the data system, I mean, Jared and Bia talked a lot about this. I mean, it was hand entered, you know, so there's going to be all sorts of messy stuff like that. So there's all sorts of problems just historically with the Cook County court system and the computerized aspect of the records that have made it really difficult. And so this clearly was sort of us scraping the site. Seemed, other than going to the chief judge's office and asking for it, which often costs tens of thousands of dollars to do, to actually get them to do that, this felt like the right way to go. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
Yeah, and also both the chief judge's office and the clerk of the circuit court are there's like a carve out for them in the like records law. Like they can release certain information, but they don't have to release big data dumps like this. And it's kind of at their discretion. Like the chief judge's office will release information, but it's at their discretion of what they want to release. And so, you know, anyone could go to the courthouse and look up, you know, the details of the single case, but determining, you know, what happened with a lot of like individual case events on the aggregate is impossible without, you know, really kind of going through this alternate door.
Okay. All right, I have like one or two more questions. So kind of going off of that, the clerk of the circuit court bit, are there any changes that the newly sworn in clerk of the court could make somewhat quickly that would improve things?
Yeah, I mean, sort of like John described. I mean, it's the whole system is built on carbon paper, for crying out loud. It was like Control C before they had Control C. So they're copying everything by scraping a pencil over it to keep it in records. I mean, what they would want to do, in talking to a couple of people, is creating a data system that's reproducible, like not making people tape these things in, and increasing access. I mean, the system would really be like if you had openness in this information, and if instead of somebody typing in 720 space IL space 506.C, you know, or parentheses, or the crimes where you're doing like possession of a controlled substance, or POS of CS, or, you know, a bunch of abbreviations that are almost nonsense, like it becomes difficult to put them together. So finding some way to make this information uniform and putting it out so that people can access it somewhere else, as opposed to people participating in the system, people, you know, lawyers, defendants, prosecutors, everyone else having to go in to look at this stuff. It would be much easier if everyone actually had a way to view these records and to access them externally. Who knows? I mean, everyone is going to promise something when they get elected, and do, you know, who knows what they'll do after, but we'll have to see.
Okay.
One more question, I think. Yeah. So it's talking about difficulties. What do these kind of difficulties mean? Sustaining this kind of work, is that part of the value of collaboration? Would that something can help?
Yeah, I'll just jump in very quickly. I mean, yeah, I think I understand the question to just mean like these sorts of projects being valuable for collaborations, journalistic collaborations. Yeah, I think that's sort of at the heart of what collaborations aren't as easy as, hey, you have one reporter from one organization and another reporter for another organization. You put them together and you double their productivity. It doesn't work that way. I wish it did, but it doesn't. There's all sorts of complications in that. But I will say that it's immensely important at this time in this news environment that we're in, to be as open as we can with collaborations of all sorts. And bigger projects inherently, you know, get your juices flowing and make you want to do something big and important, and things that can still need to be done in this day and age, but that are being done less and less because of the retrenchment that's been happening in the media world. So that's my sort of quick answer on that.
Okay, well, thank you so much everyone for the really interesting presentation. It's great to have you here. So everyone, please join the post presentation Zoom call. It's at https bit.ly/chn-remote-zoom being shared on the screen right now. And if people want to stick around for breakout groups, you can do so in the Chai Hack Night remote Slack channel via slackme.chaihacknight.org. And tonight's broadcast will be posted in the coming days on Chai Hack Night's YouTube channel. So I guess that's the time for us to wrap up with our famous closing phrase. Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Take care and go forth and
Hack.
yay. Thanks, everyone.